Hey everyone, welcome to another live stream. I'm so glad that you could be here and join us for another broadcast. Took a week off, had to go visit some family back east, and it was wonderful. But we are back with another great show for you guys this evening. We're going to talk about those pesky corporations that are buying up all of the houses. And tonight we're going to talk about how that's contributing to a little bit of the housing inventory problem and what that means for people out there that might be buying and selling real estate. So we're going to talk about a few different things related to investors and corporations that are basically buying up all the houses that are causing a little bit of a problem. And, you know, it's interesting. It's been all over the news recently that, you know, investors have come out of the woodwork and they're buying up homes. And this really has sort of kind of taken shape since the pandemic. There's always been investors that are buying homes. And when we say investors, there's a couple different things that we kind of need to address with that. So there's, you know, you have what we call like your mom and pop investors, which are pretty normal, typical people that maybe own 1 to 4 investment properties. And they're renting them out, you know, to directly to the consumer. And so that's technically an investor. Then you have your corporate investors, and these also don't necessarily, you know, they're not necessarily huge corporations, although they can be. So there's kind of two versions of corporate investors. You have your LLC investors, which they could just be people that are buying a property and placing it in an LLC. So a lot of times people will see, you know, Best Properties LLC owns this home. It must be some major corporation. No, that's not necessarily the case. It could just mean that it is a small local company that has decided to own the property in an LLC. And then, of course, there's your mega corporate investor landlord types that are buying up tons and tons of properties and homes and real estate. And we're going to take a look at actually a video from a local station in Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta is one of the hardest hit areas when it comes to corporate investors, not just buying up 1 house or 4 houses or 6 houses or 10 houses or an entire street. We're talking about these corporate investors buying up entire neighborhoods, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So first, I'm going to put this article up on the screen. And this article here, it comes from, this is from Fortune. So investors are scooping up roughly 1 in 5 homes sold in the housing market and making more money than before. And this is a recent article. This is just, I think, a couple days old. So this is current. So like I said, in 2020, when the pandemic hit, interest rates were very, very low. Money was very, very cheap. And not only were consumers buying up a lot of homes, hence the crazy price appreciations, but also corporations were buying up a lot of homes as well. It kind of tapered off as interest rates went up and money became more expensive to borrow. But as of the last few weeks and months, we're seeing a huge uptick in investor activity. So let's take a look to see what Fortune has to say. And before we get into this, if you guys have any questions or comments, please put them into the chat. I will respond here on screen. If you are watching live, I'd love to know where you're watching from, whether that's in a different state, a different country, somewhere around the world. I'd love to know what market you're in. And if you want to tell me a little bit about what that market is doing, would love to know what you're experiencing in real estate in your local area, because as always, real estate is hyper local. Okay, let's get into this article. At the start of last year, investors pulled back. Their home purchases plummeted almost 50%, according to Redfin, not too far off from existing home sales, which, as we know, fell to their lowest point in almost 30 years. It was a change from their activity throughout the pandemic-fueled housing boom, though. At that time, investor home purchases more than doubled. And again, we kind of talked about this earlier on. This is because their money was very cheap. Interest rates were very low, and prices hadn't gone absolutely insane yet. So investors had a particularly easy time picking up homes. Everyone was buying homes because mortgage rates were historically low and remote work became a thing. It all changed when mortgage rates soared, and in some areas, home values declined and rents cooled, putting a dent in investors' profits. And let's not forget borrowing costs were much higher too. So it's kind of interesting because, again, like we said, real estate's hyper local. And I like how this article says that, and in some areas, home values declined and rents cooled. A lot of times you see very large blanket statements made about what home prices are doing, what rents are doing, what home prices will do, or what rents will do. But it's really, really important that real estate is hyper local. And I mean, like, it's really, really hyper local. So it's not just about the state. It could vary by county. It could vary by areas in a county. It could vary by city to city. It could even vary by neighborhood to neighborhood within a city. So keep that in mind. Now they're back, referring to investors. Investor home purchases are rising, albeit slightly, for the first time in almost 2 years, according to Redfin. In a newly published analysis, which we'll take a look at, Redfin found investors bought 44,000 homes in the first quarter, up 0.5% from a year earlier. Redfin defines an investor as any institution or business that purchases residential real estate. So we saw an uptick for the first time in 2 years, and that almost coincides perfectly with what interest rates did. And remember, about 2 years ago is when interest rates really started to increase, and increase very heavily and very quickly. And when that happened, that made the cost of borrowing money much more expensive. And obviously that affects your end consumer that's just looking to buy a home so they can live in, but it also affects investors as well. Investors bought almost 19% of homes sold in the first quarter of this year. So roughly 1 in 5 homes per Redfin. That's fewer homes than before and throughout the pandemic, but it is the highest share in close to 2 years, the analysis read. So again, not quite as crazy as the pandemic era buying frenzy, both for end consumers and also for investors, but we are seeing an uptick. The rationale behind the return being, with home prices and rents back on the rise and the initial shock of elevated mortgage rates in the rear view mirror, investors are easing their foot off the brake pedal, according to Redfin. That being said, they're making more money than they were a year ago too. In March of this year, this is crazy, guys. In March of this year, the typical home sold by an investor drove a slightly more than 55% return, or close to $175,000 in profit. Last year, in the typical situation, an investor sold a home for more than $146,000 than they bought it for, or above 46%. Fewer investors sold at a loss too. Just try to wrap your head around that for a second. And this is March of last year. The typical home sold by an investor drove a slightly more than 55% return. That $175,000, that is, to me, that's an insane amount of money. That's a lot to make. And imagine if that investor, this is just talking about per home. What if that investor owns 10 homes? That's a lot of money to make. Redfin's analysis found investors are buying both more expensive homes than before, and a record share of the most affordable homes in the country. So they're buying not just your first-time starter affordable homes, they're also starting to buy your expensive, higher-end luxury homes. The typical home bought by investors in the first quarter cost $464,560, up 9.2% from a year earlier. Investors purchased $31.3 billion worth of homes in the first quarter, up 6.6% year over year. So obviously we're talking about some big numbers there. And, the typical home bought by investors in the first quarter costing $464 and change. Obviously that's a nationwide average, and that's still higher than the nation average for the median home price. So obviously investors have deep pockets, which is no surprise. And they are willing to spend that money into about $31 billion worth of homes in the first quarter, just in the first quarter, mind you. Here's the thing. While their purchases of more expensive homes increased the most in the first quarter, low-priced homes still represent a larger share. So low-priced homes amounted to 47.5% of investor purchases in the first quarter, but high-priced homes amounted to 28.5%, according to Redfin. And a lot of the increases in their more expensive home purchases were driven by investors' growing presence in California. In San Francisco and San Diego, investors bought more than 23% of homes sold in the first quarter, some of the highest shares apart from cities in Florida, such as Miami and Jacksonville. So you're starting to see sort of a little bit of the Californian effect. And so for some of those that might be watching out there that aren't familiar with my broadcast, I am in California. I'm about 40 miles east of Los Angeles. I am in a town called Claremont, which is technically a small suburb of LA. And the California effect is certainly taking place here where, and this is sort of goes along with the law of averages. When you start to buy really, really expensive things, that brings your average price up. And even though those units might be in a smaller number compared to the more reasonable average price units, it brings the whole average up because it's just so much more expensive. So it's going to be no surprise that here in California, property is much more expensive than the average price of property in just a given area of the United States. So obviously that's why that average is increasing. Now, when I read this, I did find it to be a little bit surprising because San Francisco and certainly San Diego are two, I wouldn't say non-affordable markets, but they're certainly more expensive markets. So it is surprising to me because typically when you think investors, you think investors are just really looking for a good deal, a home that they can buy low, rent high, or sell high, as opposed to, paying a premium for properties and assets in some of these larger, more wealthy, higher end cities like San Francisco and San Diego, especially San Diego. Obviously, San Francisco's had some challenges lately with the pandemic, a lot of people working from home, tech exiting that area. However, there's been a little bit of a resurgence in the tech industry there because of all the AI that's happening. So actually, there's been some reports of people moving back to San Francisco in a little bit higher numbers over the last couple of years. Of course, that city still faces issues with income inequality, unhoused individuals living on the streets. So there's a little bit more of a dynamic when it comes to San Francisco. But San Diego is a beautiful area. It's located right on the coast, if you're not familiar. Wonderful weather. There's a big military presence there. So I'm surprised to see that investors are breaking into that market because the average home price in San Diego is quite high. In fact, I believe last time I looked at it, I believe it was somewhere around $900,000. But quick Google search will tell you if I'm right or wrong. But their profit in San Francisco doesn't compare to, let's say, Philadelphia. That kind of makes sense. In the former, the typical home sold by an investor sold for close to 29% more than the investor bought it for. In the latter, the typical home sold by an investor sold for slightly over 136% more than the investor bought it for. So interesting to note that obviously this kind of goes back to what I was saying just a little bit ago about markets like Philadelphia, a little bit more affordable, a little bit more blue collar. The margins there are just a lot better for these investors. 29% still nothing to scoff at, but San Francisco just not returning quite the same profit as some of these other cities that investors are active in. While investors are still buying single family and multifamily homes, their purchases of single family homes rose in the first quarter of the year by nearly 4%, but their multifamily purchases fell across townhouses, condos, and apartments. Now, this is really interesting because typically the multifamily segment was sort of the bread and butter for corporate investors. And a lot of that had to do with apartment buildings and condos. The reasons condos and townhouses are a little bit more popular by investors is because there's just a little bit less maintenance. There's an HOA where the investor or the owner can just pay the HOA fee, and that's typically going to maintain all of the exterior of the property, the common grounds. Sometimes it even covers the streets, if they're private streets, pool, spa, clubhouse, gym, all of those things. And again, the exterior of the property. So paint, stucco, roof. And that can be very attractive to an investor because they don't have to really babysit the property quite as much. It's just a little bit easier. And then apartments, that's the other big one. And apartments are still very attractive to investors because, well, it's in bulk. You can buy an apartment building. Obviously, it's going to be more expensive than buying one single family home or a couple of condos or townhomes. But you can buy one apartment building that's, say, 25 units, and those apartments are always going to be in demand, especially if you buy in a good area. The turnover of those units might be a little bit higher, but it's a good investment. It's always going to bring you a return. Plus, apartment buildings typically sell well in the future. So it's kind of interesting that the higher density multifamily kind of properties are just really not as successful or not as active. In this country, there's a demand for single family homes fueled by an idealization of them. Consider tiny homes. Single family homes made up close to 69% of investor purchases in the first quarter, according to Redfin, and they've gained market share. And I think that part of the thing with single family homes being idealized has a lot to do with COVID and the pandemic, because as you remember, people were fed up with being indoors, and a lot of people were craving having at least some type of outside backyard or front yard space. So all of those people living in apartments, small condos, small townhomes, some of these multifamily setups, they were really just kind of over being inside all the time. And when you're stuck inside with your family, no matter how much you love them, and a couple little kids and things like that, that small space can start to wear thin on people and attitudes and their patience level. So I think a lot of people started to really think to yourself, you know what? It's COVID, everything is shut down. My condo or apartment in an urban area or the city center, I can't walk to anything that I want to do. Everything is closed. The bars, restaurants, entertainment, shows, concerts, it's all closed. That's the whole reason I live here, is because it's close to work, which is also closed, and all this recreational stuff. I'm going to try to buy a home out in the suburbs where I at least can have a garden. The kids can run around. I can have more space. So I think that's a huge reason why single family homes have been kind of idealized and really, really sought after by the general public. The analysis found 18.4% of U.S. single-family homes that sold in the first quarter were purchased by investor, the highest share since mid-2022. Again, that's when rates really started to take off. Meanwhile, the share of other property types bought by investors fell from a year earlier to 31.9% for multifamily properties and 18.1% for both condos, co-ops, and townhouses. So very interesting that this investors are kind of gravitating towards a different product. And I think that there's two reasons. One, we just talked about the desirability of them by consumers, both to rent and to purchase. People just simply want to have a single family home. They want that sort of that feeling of independence. They don't want to share space. But also, and I think probably what contributes more to why corporations and large investment firms are gravitating towards single-family homes is because appreciation. Single-family homes tend to appreciate quicker and to a higher amount than homes like townhomes, condos, and certainly apartments. Apartments are difficult to appreciate because you can't own them. You can't sell one apartment, at least here in California. Obviously, in other places, New York, possibly Miami. I know on the East Coast, you can buy an apartment. Here, that doesn't really work that way. So I believe that a large reason that some of these corporations and these corporate investors are choosing to purchase single-family homes is because they know that they're desirable, they're coveted, and there's demand to buy them so they can sell them back to us or rent them back to us. And also, the appreciation is much bigger than it would be if it was a townhome, condo, or apartment building. However, a New Jersey-based Redfin agent said the balance of power between investors and regular home buyers is changing. The agent suggested that when there's a bidding war for a home, sellers may prefer to choose the person who will actually be living in there. And in some cases, individuals might actually be willing to pay more upfront than investors. So we're seeing a little bit of sort of the human element, if you will. And I'm obviously a real estate agent. I've been in the real estate field for over a decade, and this is actually not new. And in fact, there is a box on the California Residential Purchase Agreement that is supposed to be checked. And if the buyer wants to buy the property as a non-primary residence, they're supposed to check a box that says, I am not going to occupy this as my primary residence. Now, there's nothing that says they have to check that. It's not like it's a breach of the contract or, some type of illegal act if they don't check that box. So I guess they could just lie. But it's interesting that that is something that's already kind of woven into the contract in terms of information that the seller may be able to determine. However, this is not new. A lot of times when people sell their homes, especially homes of, 15, 20, 30 years, it's not uncommon for a seller to say, hey, what's the home going to be used for? Is an LLC going to buy it? I would prefer to sell it to someone who's going to live in this home, whether or not that's a single person, a family, a young person, a divorcee, that doesn't matter. And in fact, they can't discriminate based on those items. However, sellers do want to know, hey, is the person buying it actually going to live there? Or is this just going to be a rental, an investment, or something like that? And I think, again, like I said earlier, this is a little bit of the human element. I don't know if you've experienced this in your market. Drop a comment. Let me know. Have you heard of home sellers that prefer to have their property purchased by people that will occupy it? Have you sold a home and did you care about who was going to buy it or how your property was going to be used? Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. It's not often you hear that, but as Fortune has previously reported, most estimates put ownership of institutional investors like our friends Blackstone and Invitation Homes at less than 5% of single-family rentals and less than 1% of all single-family homes. So it can be hard to blame them for all of the country's housing woes. However, it is a different story when it comes to some markets such as Atlanta, where institutional investors own more than 4% of all single-family homes, and it could be contributing to higher costs. This is a really great point because you'll hear a lot of people that are really frustrated with the current housing market say, oh, it's all investors' fault. It's all these greedy corporations. They're buying up everything. And while obviously, I understand the frustration and the feelings that people have with the difficulty that is the housing market right now, I get it. It's hard, especially for Gen Zs and millennials. It's difficult to buy a home right now due to interest rates, costs of the home, and inflation. But this is, really, really important to realize here. At less than 5% of single-family rentals and less than 1% of all single-family homes are owned by the big two, Blackstone and Invitation Homes. So while people like to make them out as the boogeyman for the housing crisis of the United States, that's not really fair. And I'm not siding with these institutional investors. Believe you me, I certainly think that there needs to be something done in order to keep properties for end consumers. Now, keep in mind, we can't just ban corporations from owning property because corporations oftentimes buy property and then make them available for rent. And renters have rights too. Renters deserve properties and renters deserve to be able to have a home to rent. So not everything should be available for purchase, but perhaps some type of limit in a given geographical area that, a company can't own more than X number of homes in a certain number of square blocks. I don't know. That's up for legislators to figure out. But it's just interesting because this just goes to show you that, it's not all just, corporations' faults. And it is important to know, though, that it's hyperlocal because as it goes on to say, however, in areas like Atlanta, investors own 4%. That's 4 times the amount of homes owned throughout the nation. And we are going to take a look at a video here in a moment that kind of talks about the difficulties that Atlanta is facing. The conversation surrounding investors in the housing world is layered, but what we know is they are back after an almost 2-year hiatus, and their purchases are on the rise after a short-lived slump amid an all-around frozen housing market. Still, there is no match to what was experienced during the pandemic housing frenzy. So again, just interesting stuff about corporate investors and what they're doing, where they're doing it, and how it's affecting things. So, again, corporate investors, they're a problem right now, but we can't blame them for everything, because at the end of the day, it's still a small sliver of the overall product in America that is a single family home. And if we want to blame someone for housing problems in the United States, we could take it all the way back to 2008. Remember, the problem with 2008 was a lending crisis. A lot of really, really, really bad loans were created, and people had loans and they shouldn't have had the loans that they got. Ended up buying multiple homes, or they ended up buying a home that was way more than they could afford. There was defaults, there was foreclosures, and we had a huge real estate and economic crash. But one of the side effects of that was the fact that home builders got absolutely demolished, and a lot of them went out of business. And we stopped building homes. And if you've watched my live streams or watched my videos, you know that I've preached this in a multitude of videos before. But home builders got absolutely throttled. They got destroyed to the point where a lot of them went bankrupt and they went out of business, and they didn't come back into business. So from 2008 to about 2016 or 17, we were very, very low on new build properties. And that's a long time now. We're talking about over 10 years. And in fact, we didn't get back to our average of new home starts and finishes until about 2021 or 2022. So we're talking almost 15 years of below average building. And that's a huge reason why we are in the deficit we are in today, because American home builders, I don't want to say they slacked off, but they just didn't build homes. And during that time, millennials came of age. We have Gen Zs. These are huge segments of the population, and they all need places to live, and their families need places to live. So if we really want to talk about reasons that we have a housing problem, I think the more accurate reason is our just simple deficit of supply for homes in this growing nation. So I want to switch over to a different article. Let me do this and go back to this. So this is this Redfin report. Again, this came out May 15th, so 7 days ago. Investor home purchases rise for the first time in nearly 2 years. Investor purchases climbed 0.5% from a year earlier in the first quarter, the first uptick since mid-2022. So again, it's not the fact that the number is up a bunch. It's the fact that the number is up at all for the first time in 2 years. So again, this is signaling that those corporate investors, those institutional investors are starting to pick up their pace again, which obviously is a problem for the regular home buyer because it's going to increase competition. California market saw the largest increases with investor purchases jumping more than 20% in San Jose and Oakland. Investors are coming off the sidelines partly because they're making more money. This is a crazy statistic. The typical home sold by an investor in March went for 55% more, $175,000, than the investor bought it for, up 46% or $147,000 a year earlier. That is insane to me that 55% more. Now, they're not saying how long they held this investment, probably not for a very long time, but to make $175,000 on one investment is crazy. I mean, they were already doing quite well, $147,000 a year ago. But in March of this year, $175,000 per property resold. And imagine if that investor had, like I said, 5 homes or 10 homes, we're talking about making a good amount of money. So very clearly, the investors are seeing that there is profit to be made, and that they are not afraid to maybe spend the money to buy homes, even though the price point is higher and the interest rate's higher, because they know that they're going to make money off of it. So, what do you guys think about this? What do you think about investor activity in real estate? Do you think it's a problem? Do you think it's going to be a long-term issue that we're going to have to face? And how do you guys feel about institutional investors in your real estate market? Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Overall, investors bought 19% of homes that sold in the first quarter, almost 1 in 5, the highest share in almost 2 years. Investors are purchasing more single-family homes and high-priced homes than they were last year, but they've also gained share in the affordable market, buying a record 26% of low-priced homes that sold in the first quarter. So basically, investors, they're just buying anything. They're buying expensive homes. They're buying affordable homes. It just doesn't really seem to matter to them. So this is kind of an interesting graph here. So national year-over-year growth in an investor purchases. So you can see that investor purchases are nothing new. I hope this is big enough. I think it's big enough for you to see. I can try to make it a little bit larger here. There we go. Oh, it's going to throw it off the side of the screen. Let's do this. So these areas, this is early 2000s. So this is the run up to the 2008 financial crisis. And then in 2006 and 7, when we started to have some problem with some loans, investors didn't do anything. In fact, they sold off a lot of their properties. It ticked back up coming out of the crisis. That's when there was a ton of foreclosures. Homes were very, very cheap. And if you were in a position to buy homes at that time, it was a very good time to buy homes. I think you can go back to anybody and ask them, hey, if you could buy a home back in 2010, would you? They'd probably say, in fact, I know they would say yes, and they would probably tell you that they would buy as many as they could. Interesting to note that here in 2011, there's a little blip where there was actually less activity. I'm not sure why that is. Kind of just interesting that for 2 quarters there, they just took a break, basically. But then they ramped back up. And this was due to, again, lots of still affordable homes coming out of the 2008 crash. And then we kind of see some, normalcy, not crazy investment activity, And then boom, this dotted line, this is when the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. And well, the floodgates opened, as they say, and investors went insane. They went absolutely crazy, up over almost 150% year over year. In comparison, as you can see, this would be like mid 2021. So mid 2020 would have been here. So this long line is a direct comparison to this short gray line. So yeah, huge increase in investor ownership. And we can't even see how positive it is because it's 0.5%. But this has been the last few years with high interest rates. So very low investor activity, and then just a slight tick up. So we're starting to see that investors are getting back in the game. The gain was primarily driven by an increase in purchases of single-family homes, which we'll discuss in the following section. This is based on Redfin analysis of county home purchase records across 39 of the most populous U.S. metropolitan areas. We define an investor as an institution or business that purchases residential real estate. Investor activity in the housing market is stabilizing following several years of dramatic ups and downs. Investor home purchases more than doubled during the pandemic home buying boom in 2021, and then plunged nearly 50% at the start of the last year as declining rents and home values ate into potential profits. And again, that's connected to interest rates. So you can kind of see here, this is across the nation investor purchases. So this just gives you an idea of how many were purchased. So it's going to mimic this graph almost perfectly. This is in percentages. This is in number of purchases. So again, you can see a huge run up until 2006 when the financial crisis kind of was starting to be felt, went to a low in 2009 when the 2008 crash was really in full swing. and then, kind of tick back up. It's interesting to note here, kind of some healthy, up, down, up, down. These are seasonal adjustments. It's obviously going to be lower in the winter, higher in the spring, lower in the winter, higher in the spring and summer, so on and so forth. But, pretty steady. And then pandemic, and then it just goes up incredibly. And here's an interesting part. Investors are buying more single-family homes than before. Investor purchases of single-family homes rose 3.9% year over year in the first quarter, the first increase in nearly 2 years. Meanwhile, investor purchases of townhouses, condos, co-ops, and multifamily properties fell 8.6%, 6.4%, and 2.5% respectively. Investors are likely keen on single-family properties because the segment of the market has posted relatively strong rent growth, aka stronger ROI potential, and has lower tenant turnover, which makes sense. Obviously, people that are going to rent single-family homes, probably going to be a family or people that have a higher rental budget, maybe a little bit more secure in their job and financial standing. So typically the turnover in single-family homes is just a little bit lower. So the rest of this is just really, really interesting stuff. More stats about how, investors are buying more expensive homes than they were before, but they're still buying affordable homes. And investor home purchases are soaring in California. Again, very, very interesting. Oakland, 22% increase. Minneapolis, 21.6%. Sacramento, 20.1%. And San Francisco, 18.5%. So of the biggest metros, California has 3 in there. So just kind of interesting stuff. Now, and here it is broken down. So Anaheim actually is not too far away from where I am. Share purchase homes bought by investors, 22.7%. So they're leading the way. Only second to Cleveland, it looks like. So a lot of activity, just some really interesting stuff. Remember when we talked about, real estate, it's hyper local, and you have to compare your area to your area. You can't just take these blanket national things. And like we talked about earlier, yes, BlackRock and Invitation Homes, the 2 biggest institutional investors, only own about 1% of single-family homes across the nation. In some areas, it's a lot higher than that. And one of the areas that we're seeing that's really, really high is in Atlanta, Georgia. So what we're going to do is we're going to share this. I'm going to make this full screen. I'm going to get rid of this so that you guys can see a little bit more. But this is basically a news clip from an Atlanta news station talking about how 3 corporations own 19,000 metro Atlanta homes.
Stunning new details tonight on Georgia's housing crisis.
We need some volume here.
A GSU study says
Why don't we have any volume? Maybe we won't be watching a video.
19,000.
Let's see, does this one work?
Brand new neighborhoods with brand new.
No, it doesn't. Give me 1 second.
In crisis, a GSU study said as 19,000 homes, not apartments, homes in the metro are owned by 3 companies.
Why I don't have any audio, which is going to make watching a video not work very well. But essentially in Atlanta, there's 3 corporations that own 19,000. Again, the stat was in Atlanta, there was a 4% ownership of all the single family homes by just corporate investment. So the problem with that is that when corporations own like an entire neighborhood or area, they now start to dictate not only the rent in that area, but they also dictate the value and home pricing. And, home ownership and home value works on comps. So if one property sells for 500,000, but every other home is worth 300,000, then it's easy to discern that that $500,000 home is not worth it. Somebody overpaid. But if a corporation comes in and then, and let's say the neighborhood or the area is a neighborhood of $300,000 homes, and a corporation comes in and they just pay cash and they pay 400,000. You might think, well, they overpaid. They didn't get a good deal, but they don't care. But then if that same corporation buys another home on the block and pays 405,000, and then buys another home on the block and pays 404,000, and then another home, is 412,000. Now, after enough time, you've got a home value. If you go back and look at the comps, say, oh, look, 3 or 4 or 5 homes just recently sold for between 400 and 410,000. This must be a $410,000 neighborhood. And that's how it can be affected. Oh, okay. So I guess we can't hear. I don't know why I can't hear it, but let's see. I'll throw in the caption so at least I can follow along. Okay, so let's go back to this. Thank you, Michelle P, for giving me an audio check.
Stunning new details tonight on Georgia's housing crisis. A GSU study says 19,000 homes, not apartments, homes in the metro are owned by 3 companies. That's nearly 1 in every 9 houses up for rent.
1 in every 9 houses up for rent.
Neighborhoods where corporations own it all. Channel 2's Michael Dowdna is live in Paulding County. And Michael, this is important because it drives up prices for everyone.
See, this is important because it drives up prices for other people. And this is kind of what we were talking about in terms of these corporations come in, they buy up homes, they set high rents, and they basically can sort of have their own way with the real estate market because now they are creating their own comps.
Yeah, when you're talking about tens of thousands of homes involved here, well, it can make an impact, meaning that homes that you see like this one that would originally have been a starter home about a decade or so ago are now for lease. Signs in front yards showing not a home for sale, but for rent.
Atlanta has more of these types of properties than the next couple of metro areas combined.
These properties are single-family homes owned by corporations, not people. And Atlanta is the #1 location for these houses in the entire country.
So the #1 location in the entire country, that is crazy. So again, this kind of goes back to, Atlanta being a little bit of a special case, because even though the major investment firms only own 1% across the nation, in Atlanta, they're obviously feeling this. So if you're a home buyer in Atlanta, obviously you're going to be having a little bit more of a challenging time because you're competing against other home buyers, but also these investment companies and corporations.
According to GSU professor Taylor Shelton.
Just a decade or so ago, none of these companies even existed.
But a recent study found that just 3 companies, known to customers as Progress Residential, Invitation Homes, and Main Street Renewal.
There's Invitation Homes. There they are. That I'm sure all of these freaking suck and they're all terrible. But Invitation Homes, oh man, they are really, really bad. And when I say bad, I mean, they buy up a lot of houses and it makes it difficult for people.
Own more than 19,000 homes in the metro area.
The homes that most of these companies are buying are exactly the kind of starter homes that 15, 20, 30 years ago would have been first-time home buyers.
And that's one of the big problems. So imagine they own 19,000 homes. If there were 19 more thousand homes on the market in this area, in the Atlanta metro area, think about the relief that home buyers would get in terms of having to compete against a bunch of different buyers, prices being driven up. I mean, 19,000 is not a small number, especially given, one kind of metropolitan area. And again, in this area, these are homes that, we would consider to be very buyable, first-time homes, and they're just not there anymore because corporations bought them up.
In certain areas, these corporations can own most of the homes in a neighborhood. Take this street where every single house you see is owned by Invitation Homes.
Every single home on a street is owned by Invitation Homes. That is bonkers to me.
For rent and not to buy, impacting the entire market as a whole.
It makes it impossible to find a deal.
Jordana Haig says the end result has led to higher prices as corporations have bought up much of the supply of homes, pushing up house prices while also allowing them to control the rent.
That's problematic because there should be more competition to keep prices reasonable.
But for other
Yeah, and that's exactly it. So it's a double-edged sword. It's on both ends where they are buying up homes, so there's not enough inventory, and people can't buy homes, and then they're renting them back. But because they own them all, they can set the rent pricing because they basically have a monopoly. These corporations basically have a monopoly on this Atlanta area. It's really crazy to think about.
Others like DeMar Madison, these rental homes allow folks to try out home ownership without the full commitment.
You need a new roof, you call invitational, tell them, hey, I need a new roof. So I think it just varies. I think it depends on the person.
Now, while this study focused on just the top 3 corporations that own the most property, if you actually expanded that out to the top 10, well, they own more than 30,000 homes in the metro area. If you expand that beyond just the immediate metro, those numbers only continue to climb higher. We're live in Paulding County. Michael Dowdna, WSB Tonight.
I think those numbers are just shocking for so many people here tonight, Michael. Thank you. Stunning new details.
Crazy, kind of wild that there's so much being bought up in such a specific area. I mean, an entire street. From Michelle, describing renting as trying out home ownership without the commitment is absolutely well. Yeah, I mean, I guess I get what they're saying. You don't have to repair things. You don't have to maintain the property. If there's an issue with the roof, you just call up the landlord. But there's a downside to that, and that's the fact that you're paying someone else's mortgage. You're paying the mortgage for someone else. You're not getting the benefit of the equity, and you're at the mercy of a corporate landlord. And chances are, they're not going to be willing to work with you if you have an issue, with your lease or something comes up. It's going to be an issue, and that they're going to be raising the rent at any time that they have the possibility to do so. So we have another video over here. And this one is talking about basically this video. This is also partially what's happening with corporations. So entire communities of for-rent homes are popping up. This time it's Central Florida, but what's happening is when corporate investors do buy land to develop, they're not developing that land to build homes and then sell them to people. They are building homes and then renting them back to people, and they're doing it in entire communities and entire neighborhoods. So what we really need is we need homes available for purchase to alleviate some of the supply issue. And what's happening is these corporations are stepping in and they're essentially not letting that happen. Let's see what this is about.
Brand new neighborhoods with brand new houses seem to pop up weekly in Central Florida.
Yes, they do. But in some of these communities, the homes are not for sale. West U's Meredith McDonough takes us into these rent-only subdivisions.
And so this is, a lot of times they call this like build to rent. That's a very common thing that happens, and it's basically because these corporations know that if they build a house and sell it to you, they only get paid one time. But if they build houses and then rent them out to you, they get paid every month. Now, obviously, sure, the payment that they get from rent is much, much, much smaller than if they sold it. But over time, in the long run, they get to dictate the rental prices. It's beneficial for taxes if they're a corporation. And at the end of the day, they can build a whole community of homes, rent them out for 20 or 30 years, and then they can start selling homes. And those homes have appreciated a huge amount in that time. So a lot of builders are going to this kind of business model where it's like, why would we just sell them and get paid once when we could just get paid every month? Sure, it takes a little bit longer to recoup your money, and the ROI takes a little bit longer, but over time, you can make a lot more money.
Previously resided in New York and came to Florida for the good weather, more family-oriented environment, fresh air, sun, beaches, all that good stuff.
Joanna Becknell was looking for the perfect home, and she found it at Binion Reserve in Apopka. With so many new neighborhoods being built in Central Florida, this one is unique. The homes are not for sale, but for rent.
I was surprised. Normally you see apartment communities going up, and to see a community of homes going up. And I said to myself, goal, next year, I'm going to get a house. And here I am.
This community is one of 9 owned and operated by American Homes for Rent. You may have seen some of the rental home communities in Apopka, but also at Sky Lakes in St. Cloud and Celery Cove in Sanford. Brent Laundrie is the Executive Vice President of Development for AMH. He flew in from Atlanta to take us on a tour of Windward Hills across from the Orlando Apopka Airport.
So in Central...
Notice that they said he flew in from Atlanta, which is where there's a ton of institutional investors. Interesting.
Florida, and really across America, we are short housing in general. And we believe that we need more housing options, quality options of all sizes and shapes for families in all sizes and situations.
So this is great. This is a tactic often used by real estate developers, especially when they are building properties for rent. They're trying to say, we're doing our part to help alleviate the housing crisis. So we need to have all different types of options for all different types of people, which is true. But they build entire communities and neighborhoods, and then they just rent them back to us. So you can actually own in the community. You can't develop that community. There's typically a diminished sense of connectedness in a community that's full of renters because people just aren't as invested. So it'll be interesting to see how he spins this further.
Build 3, 4, and 5 bedroom homes and create a lifestyle for folks seeking a single family option with a low maintenance lifestyle and flexibility of leasing.
This neighborhood will have 101 homes with a community swimming pool and playground. We toured a 5-bedroom home. It's 2,300 square feet and about $2,900 a month. That includes mostly everything except lawn care, which is $50 a month.
At $2,900, the rent includes your property taxes, insurance, HOA fees, and obviously your monthly rent for living in the community.
So this is a common tactic where they go, renting is such a great deal because it includes everything. Like you don't have to pay property taxes, you don't have to pay insurance. That's everything. Because if you were to buy a home, you'd have to pay property taxes and insurance and HOA. What they're not telling you is all of those figures are already added into the rent. The landlords have accounted for that. They're not just not going to charge enough money to pay property taxes and insurance and HOA fees. The renters are paying for that. You absolutely are paying for it. It's just wrapped up into your rental payment. And if property taxes go up or insurance goes up or the HOA fee goes up, guess what? I guarantee your rent goes up.
Community, and that's a 1-year lease minimum for our residents.
Inside are the amenities of a brand new build without the headache of home ownership.
One of the greatest benefits we offer for our resident is peace of mind, knowing that repairs to a water heater or an appliance or the roof, as you mentioned, we take care of that for them as part of their monthly rent.
So they're going to take care of it for you. And I love the way that this is going, like, we take care of all the burden of repairs. Fixing a water heater is not that big of a deal. It's interesting. I live in a house that was built in 1955. And it's not like I spend a bunch of money every year maintaining and repairing this home. And if you bought a new home, then you'd spend even less. So, it's kind of interesting because he's talking about, you don't have to worry about this headache or that headache or this or whatever. Instead, you're still paying them every month. You're still paying for that. It's not like it's included. It's not like it's free. It might seem free because it's no cost out of pocket, but ultimately at the end of the day, they're getting you in the rent. And what is also happening is that you're not able to build any equity at all. So when your lease term is over, you're out money. If you purchased a home and paid the mortgage for 5 years and the property value goes up, chances are, and especially if you put 10 or 20% down, chances are you sell that home, you're going to walk away with a decent amount of money that you have made. If you take the same property and rent for 5 years, you are down 5 years worth of rent. This is great. Yeah. They take care of things they're responsible for. That's exactly it. How nice of them to take care of the water heater that they own, take care of the roof that they own. It's just, they're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. Yes. You're not wrong, Michelle.
This really resonated with Joanna when it came to finding a home.
I don't want to be responsible for landscaping, plumbing, electrical, that AC unit.
These rental home communities are popping up all over Central Florida. In Brevard County, Condev, a family-owned real.
So, that young lady has a point. Like, not everybody does want to be responsible for things. I get that. And if you can afford to pay the rent and you're okay with it, that's fine. And there are some living situations that are conducive to you renting. For instance, if you're trying out a new neighborhood, I know that she moved from New York, right? So she said, I moved from New York. I came down to Florida, wanted a different lifestyle. And it would probably be kind of dumb to just move from New York and just buy a house in Florida. Where in Florida do you want to live? What neighborhood works for you? What neighborhood meets your price point? Do you have to be concerned about schools in a given neighborhood or area? So oftentimes it is really important to rent before you buy, especially if you're making a move that is, between, state lines, because you're not familiar with the area. So again, there is a good reason to rent. If you have a job where, hey, in 2 or 3 years, I might get reassigned. I might have to move across the country or across the state or wherever, obviously renting, can work out. But this idea that these corporations are doing you a favor by building homes for you to rent, no, they need to be building homes for people to buy so that they can build equity, so that they can build generational wealth. Buying real estate, owning real estate is the number one way to build generational wealth and to secure your financial future. That's not a secret. And there's a reason why homeowners tend to be 40 times more wealthy than those that rent.
Real estate development company is building the Landings at Viera, located at Pineda Boulevard and Stadium Parkway. Rent will range from $2,600 to $3,500 a month. The developers say the American dream of owning a home is changing with the needs of their customers.
That American dream of housing may not be in the form of ownership all the time. I think, there are other parts of the world where very few people own homes.
Which is interest rates and the cost of home ownership in the current market environment. This is becoming a very, very viable segment where people are choosing to, as Chris pointed out, to rent a home.
Where people are choosing just to pay us every month and not own anything. There's that saying that's becoming popular, you will own nothing and be happy. And that's exactly what these guys are saying. And there's a reason it's called the American dream. They talk about, in other parts of the world, people don't own homes. And that's true. A lot of other parts of the world, people just rent. And that's why it's called the American dream, is because you can come here, you can buy a home, you can create wealth, you can make money by living in a property. You can have your own yard. You can have your own space that is yours, that cannot be taken away from you, unless you don't pay a mortgage. Then you might have a problem. But once that mortgage is paid off, it's yours. And that's why it's called American dream. There's a reason we've never heard of the England dream or the Germany dream or any of those other places' dreams, because, well, I'm not knocking their quality of life. Those might be fine places to live. I've never lived there, so I'm going to tell you. But that's why it's called the American dream. It's called the American dream because you can come here, you can have nothing, you can work hard, and you can buy a home and secure your own future, never be asked to move out, never be the victim of these absurd rental increases. What these people aren't telling you is that your rent's going to go up, and it could go up every year, X%, X amount. And you might think that you're so safe and secure in your home that they go, oh, you can rent these beautiful new 5-bedroom homes for $2,900 a month in Florida. Well, what happens in 2 years when that $2,900 is now $3,700 or $3,400? How will that affect you then? Your mortgage isn't going up. It's the same price every month.
Home that they might otherwise have bought. When this community is fully built out and mature, you're going to walk through it and it's not going to look or feel any different than one of the for sale neighborhoods, down the street.
Developers say you'll see more and more rental home communities in Central Florida because the demand is only growing.
As a single mom, especially, it's difficult to be that one income in the household and not having to come up with tens of thousands of dollars, but still being able to provide my family with that same sense of home and togetherness and harmony under one roof without feeling like we're crammed in a sardine can is really amazing.
Meredith McDonough, West 2 News.
And developers say the average renter will stay about 3 to 4 years. We've posted more information about these communities on our website at wesh.com.
So, just kind of interesting that developers are infiltrating both ways. They're buying up homes, and then the homes that are being built, they're renting them back to us, and then they're asking, they're talking like they're doing us a favor, which I don't know, that's a little bit crazy to me. So I mean, honestly, these corporate investors, they're affecting the real estate market, and the numbers might seem small, but people are going to start feeling it, and they already are feeling it, and that's why inventory is so low. And like I said, I'm not knocking renters, and we need rentals. People need to rent. You know, like the lady in the story, hey, she doesn't have tens of thousands of dollars for a down payment, and she still wants to have a home and not have a small apartment. I get that. That's all fine and good. But to act like this is the new solution, no, the solution would be to build affordable homes that people can buy, so that individuals have the same opportunity of building wealth and having housing stability that everyone else does. Renting does not equal housing security. And for all the reasons that I previously mentioned. So I hope that you guys liked the stream and got something out of this. If you're new to the stream, it'd be great if you could hit that like button, drop a subscription. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps out the channel. It helps out myself. And if you were here for the live stream, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate everything. I try to live stream every month, or I'm sorry, every week is what I try to do. So if you're around usually Wednesday is when I do it, follow the channel. I'll be back next Wednesday. And thanks so much for hanging out. I'll see you guys next time.